Dust hung motionless when he saw the rope sway beneath the dead cottonwood, as if the prairie itself refused to breathe. Silas Ward, a man carved thin by loss and empty miles, reined his mare at the fence line and felt his pulse stumble. The evening sun bled rust across the grass, spilling light onto a small figure, dangling from the branch. Bare legs mottled blue, moccasins torn, a hand-painted sign thumping her ribs. One less thief. He swung down before thought could argue, boots crunching dry burrs. Wind rattled the cattle bells beyond the ridge, but closer there was only the groan of rope and a girl's faint rasp, proof of breath still clinging. 13, maybe 14, Apache braids undone by fists, wrists bound cruel beneath the knot. Her eyelids fluttered like moth wings against closing dark. Silas's knife split hemp in 2 strokes. Gravity folded her into his arms, lighter than winter straw. Her throat bore the necklace of the noose, flesh ridged and angry. He laid her in dust, pressed ear to chest, listened. A stuttering drum, fragile but insistent. No time for prayer. He cut the lash at her wrists, felt her flinch though she did not wake. Sign ripped free, tossed to tumbleweed. His canteen dripped water past her cracked lips. A shudder rolled through her ribs, cough scraping sand from lungs. She did not speak. The silence between them felt older than either life. Footprints ringed the cottonwood. Boot heels, wagon ruts, one broken bottle. The mob had left in haste, believing the rope's verdict final. They hadn't stayed to watch the fight still breathing in her chest. Night sketched violet across the horizon. Coyotes tuned their thin pipes. Silas lifted the girl onto the mare, one arm cradling limp shoulders, and began the slow ride toward his solitary homestead, 5 miles west. Each hoofstep matched the staccato of her heartbeat. Each mile measured the distance between the law men claimed and the mercy one man could spare. Shutters on his cabin quivered in the dusk breeze. He carried her inside, laying her on the narrow cot that had known only his own sleepless weight since the fever took his wife 2 winters back. Lamplight brushed adobe walls, revealing scars at the girl's ankles, old shackles healed wrong, and fresh welts across her palms where rope had insisted on confession. Silas brewed willow bark tea, let it cool, dripped it into her mouth until her lashes flickered open, dark eyes glossy, unfocused. No fear showed, only stunned disbelief. She tried to rise, pain pinned her fast. He shook his head once, slow, placed a hand over his own heart, then over hers, an unspoken promise that nothing here would strike again. Through the night, he kept the lamp trimmed and the fire low. Outside, wind dragged clouds across a hollow moon, but in the cabin, time held its breath. He sponged her brow, cut away the rope-burned cloth, and wrapped gauze with a gentleness that surprised his calloused fingers. Memories flickered. Another frail body in this bed. Another night he could not change an ending. He pushed them aside, focusing on the pulse beneath her skin. Live, he willed. Just live. Dawn leaked pale over the prairie when her voice, rough as gravel, broke the hush. A single word in broken English. Why? He did not answer aloud. Explanation felt smaller than daylight. Instead, he poured fresh water, helped her sip, returned the cup. Questions could wait. Wounds could not. Sun climbed, burning dew off wheatgrass. Silas stepped onto the porch, scanning the horizon for dust that meant riders. None yet, but the county seat lay only a half-day south, and gossip rode faster than any horse. He unhitched the buckboard, filled its bed with hay bales to disguise cargo if flight proved necessary. Inside, the girl dozed, breath still ragged but steadier than dusk. He left the door ajar so the scent of mesquite could drift in, hoping clean air might untangle nightmares. By noon, she managed to sit, back braced against log wall. He set a tin plate of softened beans before her. She touched food with trembling fingers, prayed to no god he knew, and ate one slow mouthful at a time. When finished, she lifted the tin, tilted it to show nothing wasted. A gesture of respect his heart felt like a fist unclenching. The sign lay outside, half buried in dust. Silas slid it into the firebox, watched paint blister, wood flame. Words that had damned her cracked, curled, and rose as sparks into the chimney throat. turning judgment into ash. That night, coyotes stayed distant, as though recognizing a boundary newly drawn. Silas dozed in the chair, rifle across knees, listening to the small cabin sounds he once called loneliness, now reshaped into shelter. The girl slept, pulse under bandages drumming steadier, each beat writing a new claim on the prairie that had tried to silence her. Beyond the window, stars crowded like hard truths, but inside, two lives rested in the fragile hush between outrage and tomorrow, bound by one simple act. A man unable to ride past a broken sentence hanging from a tree. Mid-morning light fell through the cabin slats like thin knives of gold. The girl woke to their glow, eyes clearer now, though the bruises on her throat bloomed angry purple. Silas knelt by the hearth, mending a kettle lid, but he felt her stare before he heard her breath. He set the lid aside, poured water, and waited. Her voice came raw, shaped by dry winds and new pain. Ayanna. She touched her chest, a name offered like a brittle token. Silas answered with his own. No sermon, no questions. Names were enough for a first bridge. Outside, winter sun climbed. He gave her tasks that would not split her wounds, picking lentils from a sack, folding washed bandages, labors small enough to let dignity step back into her limbs. Each time her hands trembled, he pretended not to see. Near noon, hoofbeats rattled the valley floor. A dust braid twisted up the wagon track. 3 riders, red sashes at their arms, ranch hands from Carter's spread, neighbors quick to sniff gossip. Silas's jaw knotted. He slid his rifle onto the porch rail and waited as they reined in. Morning, Ward. Carter's foreman tipped his hat, but left spite in his grin. Word says you found Apache trouble on your fence. Silas shrugged, gaze steady. Found a sign nailed to ignorance. Burned it. The foreman's eyes flicked to the doorway's shadow where Ayanna's shape might hide. Sheriff will want the body for proof. Nothing dead here. Silas's tone held the weight of a closed gate. Spurs jangled as the men shifted, discomfort growing like heat. One spat dust. Thief got what comes. You harboring her. You shoulder it. Silas let silence draw tight enough to hum. No law yet says mercy's a hanging crime. Finger rested near the trigger guard. Casual, but the message rode clear. Carter's men read it, traded looks. The foreman hawked and turned his gelding. Sheriff rides sunset. Best be ready to explain. They wheeled off, dust swallowing their threat. Inside, Ayanna stood, fists white on the table edge. Fear burned in her eyes, but deeper still burned defiance. The ember they had tried to snuff on that tree. She spoke in Apache first, words sharp as flint. Then English followed, sparse but strong. I did not steal. Took back what traitors owed. 4 blankets, salt, 1 brooch of my mother. Silas listened, anger simmering slow. They trade credit, then called debt a crime. She nodded, chin lifting. When I refused, they tied rope. A moment passed, heavy as iron. Silas drew a breath that tasted of gun oil and resolve. Sheriff will come before dark. Will not greet him begging. He saddled the wagon team, loaded 2 water kegs, sacks of grain stacked high enough to hide a crouched body. Ayanna balked. She would not crawl beneath freight again. Silas understood. Instead, he lashed the sacks tall and left a hollow where she might sit upright, rifle across knees. He drove them to the North Arroyo, ground the wheels into fresh stream bed so tracks would wash clean with the next rain. At dusk, they stashed the rig beneath cottonwoods and walked the last mile back, leaving cabin dark, hearth cold, no beacon for deputies. Night fell early, a moonless ink. They camped in a cut bank where wind passed overhead without scenting them. Silas brewed coffee. Ayanna crushed juniper berries, mixing them into the tin to blunt the bitterness. Steam curled, carrying a note of desert pine. They drank without speaking, listening to distant shouts as riders milled fruitlessly at an empty homestead. When coyotes began their high hymn, Ayanna spoke again, voice lower. She told of her clans scattered by drought and rifles, of children sold into piecework, of promises broken with the same pen that signed the treaty. Silas stared at the coals, hearing echoes of his own losses, names cut down by fever, by war, by indifferent time. 2 griefs, different tongues. Same weight. He reached into his coat, drew out a small palm-sized mirror, his late wife's. The silver backing had tarnished, but glass still held sky. He offered it to her. Trade for the brooch they owe. Ayana traced the frame, understanding the gift beneath the joke. She tucked it into her satchel, eyes bright as sparked quartz. Toward dawn, storm clouds herded over the eastern rim. First rain pattered soft, then harder, drumming the arroyo walls. In that wash of sound, they slept, bodies slumped back to back, neither trusting open sky, yet both too tired to stand guard alone. Rain erased prints, cooled rope burns, whispered new seed into thirsty ground. Sunrise cracked pink over rinsed hills. Smoke still curled from Silas's chimney in the distance. Sheriff's posse had kindled a search fire, but found nothing alive to chain. Silas and Ayana watched from the ridgetop, unseen. He broke a crust of cornbread, handed half across. We ride west. Judge Ballard's court keeps better ears. Ayana's gaze followed a hawk lifting on fresh thermals, wings slicing the dawn. She nodded, slung the rifle, and stepped into the rising light. Silas matched her stride. Behind them, the cottonwood where she had swung stood empty, branch scar gouged by his knife, a place where death had lost its wager. Ahead, open land waited, vast and unsure, but now walked by two where one had hung alone. They rode west before the sun set the grass ablaze, the wagon tracks long gone beneath storm-washed earth. Miles unfolded in slow, steady heartbeats, hooves, breath, wind, and the space between Silas and Ayana filled with a wordless resolve. The judge's circuit court lay 3 days beyond the Blue Mesas, but every hour borrowed more danger. Carter's hands nursed bruised pride. The sheriff still wore a badge hungry for a scapegoat. On the first night, they sheltered in a box canyon where red cliffs held the heat after dusk. Silas built a fire small as a fist, letting flame paint the rock faces amber. Ayana gathered dry sage, laying each bundle with ritual care. When sparks lifted, she drifted to the canyon wall and traced charcoal lines, simple strokes forming a hawk in flight. Wings spread beyond the stone's edge. Silas watched, understanding little of the symbols but much of the ache they carried. She finished, pressed her palm to the drawing, then to her chest, promised that the bird would not wing alone. At dawn, a dust tongue flickered on the horizon, riders combing the high plain. Silas spotted them first, shoulders tightening like rawhide. He and Ayana veered south, weaving through thorn scrub where horses picked careful steps. Noon heat hammered rock, sweat slicked reins. The prairie sang with hidden cicadas. Still the dust tail followed, unwavering. Silas counted 6 silhouettes, hard to outrun, harder to fight on open ground. By late day, they reached the Devil's Ribbon, an abandoned rail cut that cleaved the mesa for half a mile before plunging into a dynamited dead end. Silas led the chestnut down the steep rail bed, iron rails long gone, leaving only splintered ties and powder dust gravel. The cut's walls climbed sheer on both sides, a trap if hope proved wrong, a shield if luck held. Ayana read the terrain, eyes narrowing. Ambush ground. She loosened the rifle strap, checked the breach with calm hands. They reached the cul-de-sac where blasted rock formed a jagged horseshoe. Silas halted, ears pricked to echo. Hoofbeats drummed louder, rolling down the cut like thunder cage. He dismounted, tethered the mare behind a fallen beam. Ayana climbed a talus slope, finding perch just above the bend. Her silhouette melted into rust stone. Dust billowed. Carter's foreman led the pack, revolver already drawn. They ranged short at the curve. Vision tunneled down the narrow gorge. Silas stepped into view, hat brim low, empty hands raised to shoulder height. Wind hissed through the cut, carrying his voice steady. Trail ends here. Turn back. Laughter ricocheted off stone, mean and eager. The foreman spat. We'll ride through your bones if that girl ain't hanging come dusk. Ayana's rifle cracked, sound knifing the sky. A bullet flayed the foreman's hat brim, snapping it off clean. Silence collapsed on the posse. Guns jerked upward, eyes searching the cliff, but finding only stone and shadow. Silas dropped, rolled behind a timber brace, Winchester snapping up like second heartbeat. Shots brazed rock, ricochets whining. Horses panicked, rearing against reins. Two deputies tumbled. Dust choked gun smoke. Echoes tangled in panic's roar. Ayana fired again, clipping a rifle from rough hands. Wood splintered, metal clanged, fingers screamed. She shifted higher, breathing slow, becoming the hawk she had drawn, seeing movement before intent. Below, Silas squeezed measured rounds, each slug bearing into the earth at hooves, driving men to scramble rather than charge. He aimed to break will, not flesh. Killing would seed fresh vendettas. Minutes bled like hours until the posse broke. Fearful shouts, reins yanked, hooves thundering retreat up trail. Dust swallowed their flight, leaving gun smoke hanging like tattered cloth. Silas listened for the echo of final hoofbeats, then exhaled, shoulders sagging. Ayana slid down the talus, eyes bright but hands steady. She knelt, pressing two fingers to her throat where the old rope burn throbbed. Pulse strong, alive. Silas touched her elbow. Brief, steady. We ride now. They'll fetch others. She nodded, voice a rasp of desert wind. Then we outrun the sun. They pushed on through twilight, leaving the rail cut to ghosts. Stars spilled across a black vault untouched by firelight. Moon slivered thin, a promise rather than a lamp. Fatigue hummed through bone, but they kept pace until sagging cottonwoods whispered of water. They made camp there. No fire, sky bright enough with starlight alone. Ayana crouched by the stream, washing rope scars, watching crimson dusk fade from water's skin. Silas unpacked hardtack, shared it crumbling and dry. Words were few. The night carried enough story. In the hush, he caught her gaze drifting to the mirror in her satchel. His wife's mirror. She lifted it, tilting glass to starlight so constellations swam in warped silver. For a moment, her reflection mingled with the sea of stars, face haloed by distant suns. She breathed deep, set the mirror beside her, palms open as if cradling light itself. Silas lay back, hat over eyes, listening to coyotes test the dark miles away. Sleep crept slow. In its edge, he pictured tomorrow. The judge's gate, deputies bristling, the weight of testimony spoken by a girl whose voice law once tried to hang. Fear tasted like iron, hope like river water, cold, clear, necessary. Before dawn, Ayana rested a hand on his shoulder. Gentle shake. Eastern sky glowed cobalt, the kind of blue that breaks just before sun. We ride, she whispered. Silas nodded, rising, and for the first time since fever stole his wife, he felt purpose settle like a well-fitted saddle. Two riders, one truth, miles of open light ahead. Behind them, the cottonwood gallows shrank to memory. Before them, a horizon waiting to be renamed. Gray dawn climbed over the mesa, brushing the desert in pewter light as their horses crested the long ridge toward Arroyo Crossing, the last way station before the judge's circuit seat at Three Rivers. The air tasted like iron filings. Thunderheads crowded the western horizon, stacked heavy with unfinished rain. Silas watched the sky, gauging how many miles of hard ground lay between now and the courtroom door. Ayana rode beside him, back straight, rifle across her knees, her braids fluttering like black ribbons in the dry wind. The bruises on her throat had turned from purple to sallow yellow, but her eyes gleamed hard amber, unbroken. Below, the adobe town sprawled in a slow bend of the dry riverbed. Two saloons, a mercantile, the telegraph shack, the sheriff's office squatting beside a lean-to jail. Smoke coiled thin from morning cook fires, and freight mules clanged in their traces. Silas reined in behind a stand of juniper to survey the street. No Cartermen, no red sashes. Yet. He swung down and loosened the cinches, letting the horses breathe before the descent. An hour for supplies, then we ride on, he said. Ayana nodded, eyes never leaving the jail door. Memory lingered there longer than fear. They entered town as ordinary as two weary drovers. Dust on coats, no badge in sight. Silas led the chestnut to the trough, counted the windows that might spit lead if rumors had outrun them. Ayana stepped into the mercantile, traded 6 bullets and a silver button from the mirror frame for jerky, oats, a new waterskin. She kept her gaze level, her speech sparse. No one in that store had ever heard an Apache girl bargain with such calm gravity, and no one knew how to answer anything except the clink of coin. Across the street, a telegraph clerk in a frayed vest sifted papers. Silas paid 2 bits to scan the latest wire sheet tacked to the wall. Carter Foreman wounded in Devil's Ribbon ambush. Sheriff Dunlow offers reward for murderous horse thief and accomplice. Silas folded the sheet in his mind, felt the noose of pursuit tighten again. He thanked the clerk, crossed to the stable where Ayanna waited, and pressed the jerky into his saddlebag. "We won half a day," he murmured. "They're still licking dust." Ayanna's answer was only a slow breath, but relief slipped into her shoulders. They had almost cleared the last adobe when the telegraph bell clanged. A rider pounded in from the east, horse foaming, coat streaked red with canyon dust. Silas knew the silhouette. Deputy Jessup, Carter's drinking friend. The deputy swung down, tossed a message to the clerk, and stalked straight to the sheriff's porch. The noose had found new rope. Silas touched Ayanna's arm. No words needed. They nudged the horses into the dry wash south of town, hooves muffled on sand. The wash wound between shale walls that whispered each footfall forward. Heat pooled like thick glass. At a bend, a ragged cottonwood offered brief shade. They dismounted, sharing water in measured swallows. Ayanna studied the telegraph poles marching west. "Wire runs faster than hoof," she said. Silas followed her gaze, thin black lines against the sky, humming with words they could not outride forever. He glanced at the coil of dynamite caps lashed under his saddle flap, relics from an old line repair kit. A plan flared, dangerous but clean. They mounted again, following the poles until they dipped into a shallow valley where the wire sagged low across a dry gully. Silence owned that stretch. No ranch, no road. Silas slid from the saddle, unpacked 2 caps and a coil of fuse. He bound the charge to the pole's base, ran the line to a rock berm, and struck steel on flint. Ayanna held the horses, eyes flat as calm water. The fuse hissed, burned white, vanished into dust. They turned away. The blast coughed a dull boom. Timber groaned, and the wire dropped like a slain snake. Messages to Carter would now ride the slow way, hoof and breath. They pressed on. Clouds swallowed the sun, bleeding a sepia gloom across the desert. By mid-afternoon, they reached the chalk mesas that ring 3 rivers. Lightning stitched the sky behind them. Thunder rolled, muffling any pursuit. In the distance, the courthouse cupola glimmered, tin bright, beacon and battleground both. They rode into town under lowering clouds. Market stalls shuttered early. People hurried, sensing storm and rumor. At the courthouse steps, Deputy Stone waited, coat dark with road dust, hat brim dripping rain. Her eyes widened at the sight of Ayanna alive, at rope scars healed enough to testify. She nodded once to Silas, admiration unclad. "Judge's docket cleared," she said. "Briggs recanted. Carter's warrant looks thin as snakeskin." Inside, oil lamps fought the dim. Judge Ballard, tall, spare, restless, stood at the bench. Records lay open. The ledgers Wade had kept. The charcoal hawk Ayanna had sketched on a torn account sheet. Testimony signed by Deputy Stone. Ballard raised his gaze. "Miss Ayanna Gray Wolf, do you still swear?" Her voice rose steady, carrying the hush of countless miles. "I swear." She spoke in English, simple but unbroken, telling how blankets promised for meat were never paid, how the brooch was pawned by the traitor who called her thief, how ropes bite deeper than hunger. She ended with a whisper the whole room leaned in to catch. "Mercy is not theft." Ballard's pen scratched verdict. Gavel fell once, sharp as rifle crack. Charges dismissed, restitution ordered. Carter's men summoned to answer for attempted murder on sovereign land. Rain hammered the roof, applause from a sky long throttled. Deputy Stone escorted Ayanna outside where stormwater sheeted off the eaves. People gathered. Townfolk, ranch hands, 2 nuns from the mission school, watching the girl who had swung and lived. No one shouted thief now. Children shyly offered half-wild flowers. Ayanna accepted, fingers gentle. Silas stepped beside her, hat heavy with rain. He felt something uncoil inside, perhaps grief releasing its final knot. He looked to the horizon where lightning strobed over the route home. "Ready?" he asked. Ayanna slipped the flowers through her braid, eyes bright as brand new copper. "The road's still ours," she answered. They mounted under drumming rain, water washing blood dust from saddles, washing past accusations into gutter streams. Town lights blurred behind them. Ahead, the prairie opened, rinsed and waiting. Clouds broke in ragged seams, and a single shaft of sunset reached down, gilding the wet earth. Two riders, one truth. No rope strong enough to catch the wind between them. They returned along a prairie rinsed clean, the rain-fed wind carrying scents of mesquite and beginnings instead of gunsmoke. Storm clouds broke apart, revealing stars bright as hammered tin. Ayana rode ahead, her braids beaded now with white petals the nuns had pressed into her palms, each flower trembling like a soft bell in the chill breeze. Silas followed, hat brim dripping, watching how moonlight laid a silver track wherever her horse stepped, as if the land itself marked this journey home. At Cottonwood Gulch they paused. The tree that had once borne a rope stood skeletal, bark stripped by wind. Ayana dismounted, approached the trunk, and pulled a small pouch from her satchel. Inside lay the mirror Silas had given and 4 scraps of wool blanket, tokens of debt repaid by court decree. She buried the wool at the roots, a quiet restitution. Then she set the mirror in a hollow, glass-facing dawn, so the first light would not forget what darkness tried to claim. Silas watched without words. Some ceremonies need no witness, but the earth. Back at Sunrise Bend, spring had already set the creek singing. Calves bawled for milk. Fresh shoots greened the fence line. The cabin door opened to warmth instead of dread. Ayana crossed the threshold first this time, the bruise on her throat now the faint color of distant hills. She placed the flowers in a clay cup, water glinting around their stems, then rolled up her sleeves and ground corn into meal, the pestle's rhythm echoing the pulse of steadier days. Silas unloaded supplies, stacked the court papers on the mantel beside Wade's old ledgers. He glanced at the rope scar across Ayana's neck, saw how it faded a little more each sunrise. He felt his own scars, invisible yet loosening, as if her healing tugged loose the knots in his chest. Evening settled, they shared bread smelling of sage and lard, ate in companionable hush. Outside, whip-poor wills called, no longer sounding like warnings, but like invitations to rest. Weeks blurred forward. Silas built a second corral. Ayana planted beans in straight rows that obeyed sun and rain better than fear. Travelers stopped for water and stories. A freed blacksmith heading north, 3 Mexican vaqueros trailing cattle east. Each left with fresh bread or a mended bridle, and rumors spread of a ranch that welcomed the weary no matter their tongue or skin. Carter's men never returned. Sheriff Dunlow resigned under the judge's censure, and a new lawman arrived who valued coin less than justice. Summer nights bloomed with crickets and slow thunder across distant ridges. One dusky evening, Ayana stepped onto the porch where Silas strummed an old guitar that had not spoken since his wife's passing. She asked in careful English to learn the chords. He placed her fingers on the strings. The first note rang shaky but bright. They sat shoulder to shoulder, trading the melody like a waterskin. When the moon cleared the eaves, they played a tune that had no name, half frontier hymn, half canyon lullaby, and the prairie listened, wind pausing to breathe it in. During harvest, Ayana found the courage to ride alone to Willow Fork, trading beans for a sack of rare blue cloth. She returned radiant, sewing it into a shirt for Silas that fit across shoulders broadened by hope. On the first frost morning, he wore it to town, accepting handshakes from men who once looked away. They asked after Miss Graywolf, no longer adding the hard edge of suspicion. He answered that she kept the ranch books straighter than any accountant in 3 counties. Winter returned, but its claws were dull. Snow drifted around the cabin while lamplight spilled golden across 2 sets of boots by the hearth. They read aloud from a tattered almanac, Ayana stumbling over odd English sayings, Silas laughing low, correcting gently. When sleep crept close, she placed the guitar on its hook and set a fresh log on the fire. He bolted the door, knowing no posse lurked beyond. Safety, once a stranger, had learned the path home. On the eve of the new year, they saddled horses and rode to the ridge. Stars braided milk white across the vault. The wind tasted like ice and cedar. Silas reached into his coat, drew out a narrow copper band, twin to the one he wore. No speeches, only a question found in the hush between 2 heartbeats. Ayana extended her hand. In that simple gesture, bruises became history, not fate. He slid the band onto her finger. Far below, Sunrise Bend glittered with lantern light, a beacon stitched by deeds louder than any vow. They rode back slow, hooves muffled in powder snow. At the gate, Ayana paused, gaze sweeping the dark horizon once rimmed with gallows and fire. Many still hang, she whispered. Silas touched her hand. Then we keep riding. Open gates, cut ropes, pass bread. She nodded, and in her smile he saw the echo of hawk wings drawn on canyon stone. Flight promised, flight kept. Inside, the cabin clock struck midnight. 2 mugs of coffee steamed between them on the table, scent mingling with pine from the fresh-cut bough above the door. Ayana opened the ledger, added a single ink line beneath all the year's tallies. Mercy carried, justice spoken, freedom shared. Sunrise Bend rises again. She closed the book. Silas raised his mug. Outside, snow waltzed in moonlight. Coyotes chorused not in mourning, but in celebration of a prairie wide enough for every healed name. If this tale of silent courage and unasked for mercy spoke to you, saddle up with us. Hit subscribe, press like, and tell in the comments which moment made you feel the prairie wind. Your voice keeps these stories riding farther than any horse can run.